What's up, everybody? Welcome to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., Claudia Bellafato holding it down in Boston at the DraftKings studios. We got a great show coming up for everybody. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review us. Leave us a 5-star rating and check us out here live Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network, streaming free, of course, on Samsung TV Plus, the Roku channel, Xumo Play, DraftKingsNetwork.com, and right here on our YouTube channel. Fun one coming up. Claudia, who do we got on the show today?
Yeah, GoJo, of course, we have some football because OTAs kicked off this week. So latest on the NFL teams and their practices. And speaking of football, time to cook. Cowboys receiver Brandin Cooks will join the show to talk about the upcoming season. And let's get wild. You already know what it is. It is Tuesday, which means Charlotte Wilder will join us to help preview the NBA Conference Finals, which does come back tonight. It's a little strange, guys, because it is playoffs, so of course there's a ton going on, but as it gets later into the series, there's less games, of course. So last night, just a game in hockey, no basketball. Do we like that? Do we hate that? Because you really have to just focus on one game. If it doesn't give you what you want, you have to just go watch a Netflix series like Senior, or, which side of this are we on, Senior?
You got to kind of look at both sides of this, right? There's when you see a lot of sporting events on, you're like, oh my God, this is great. You got the channel change in your hand. You can flip back and forth. But it's kind of like, while Red Zone's the greatest thing out there, the one thing you don't get is continuity of one game, right? You're jumping around, and you can, when there's a lot of sporting events on, you can flip around and watch as much as you want of one, but you want to flip to the others and see what's going on. So it was actually nice last night to have the one WNBA game of Connecticut and Indiana, and then following that was one hockey game, Edmonton and Vancouver. So me and my wife just sat and watched both games, and at one point we kind of said to one another, it's kind of nice just to settle in on one. Now, the only other side of that, Mike, is if it's a blowout, right? I mean,
sure.
the Indiana-Connecticut Sun game, which we'll talk about, was close. Vancouver and Edmonton was 2-0, and it was one of those next goal is probably gonna do it, and it was Edmonton who went up 3-0 in that one, ended up winning 3-2. So that one, wasn't as close but still fun to watch. So there's both sides to it, but I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty relaxing just to not have to keep flipping with the channel changer.
I mean, it's the difference between gorging yourself at a buffet or sitting down for a nice dinner where you only order one thing. It's higher risk because, hey, you could try a new menu item. It could go poorly there, or you could really get to stop and savor the flavors versus the buffet where it's just trying to see how many different weird things I can put on my plate at once, how many different games I can have on my computer in the YouTube quad box, and then on the or on my YouTube TV in the quad box, and then put one on my laptop there and just let my freak flag fly. But you're right. I think there is something to last night, getting to sit and fully digest everything. And honestly, just sort of take a breather a little bit. It felt like, you know what it is? The term they use, and you guys will appreciate this as fit people, active recovery. Last night was our active recovery. We have had a very, very intense playoff run so far. And much like the athletes involved, now it's about taking care of our bodies, managing the workload a little bit, and getting ourselves ready for that next step. So I'm with you guys on that. The other thing that came up last night that I wanted to run by you guys was during the Edmonton and Canucks game, there was that one goal that bounced directly off the back pipe, and it made that beautiful singing sound that only vulcanized rubber going off metal at a high speed can produce there. And it got me to thinking about my top 5 sounds in sports. I want to read these to you guys quickly and just see if there's anything that you think I'm missing. Number 5, I went puck or lacrosse ball hitting off the pipe. Number 4, I went a Shohei Ohtani home run. Just barrel the hell out of that thing. Number 3, I went the pregame flyover. It can be any sort of military airplane going over the top. Doesn't matter which one. They all rock. Number 2, Mike Breen yelling bang in an NBA playoff game. And number 1, it doesn't have to be the double variety, but the doink off the uprights. To me, that hollow doom. The number 1 sound in sports. So those are mine. Claudia, is there anything I'm missing on this list in your mind?
LeBron crying to the refs. Love that sound.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or Tom Brady crying at refs and screaming and his voice cracking. I do
Luka
love that.
Doncic this postseason would probably be the one too.
Yeah, that's true. I'd probably put flyovers a little higher up, and maybe the draft sound, the little draft ring. It's just
the draft chime.
The draft chime.
Yeah. Well, you came out with a sharpened knives this morning. Holy smokes. I think I may agree with her on the flyover sound. I mean, is there a flyover? I mean, and listen, 98, 99% of them are great. Every now and then there might be a dud. But name me a flyover that doesn't give you chills, that just doesn't kind of get you going. And I agree with all those other sounds, but I'd almost put a flyover higher than that. But I like those other sounds. I liked it because I was always a defensive player, so I was on, defensive punt team or field goal rush team. I liked the double thud, right? I like that sound. When kicker or punter kicks the ball, you hear that thud, and then you hear it being blocked. You hear the thud off somebody's hands or arm or face mask or something. The old double thud is always a joyful thing for a football player.
The double thud's a really good one. That was one of the other ones that was on the outside looking in for me there. Besides that one, the other one, and shout out to Jared Bailey on Twitter, an F-bomb caught on a hot mic at a sporting event game. When they've got the mic down on the field and all of a sudden you catch one of the players and it's like, let's effing go. That's usually in my brain when the sporting event actually starts. So that one being up there, great. Mina Kimes offered. Cam Chancellor popping the crosser on Cover One Robber circa 2013. When Cam used to come down and crunch people's bones going on those crossing routes. Really disturbing stuff. So at GoJo and Golic on Twitter is where you can weigh in on the best sounds in sports, because we had time to take in these finer notes last night. And speaking of load management, speaking of easing into things here, Claudia, we've been doing that in the NFL offseason now as well. NFL players have enjoyed a nice break, except for the young players that are coming off of the draft and the combine and all that stuff. But now we're getting back into OTAs, and everyone's starting to show up this week. We're getting a lot of those headlines, which means we got to tap into some of the players that have decided not to show up or doing in the middle of contract disputes. And Boy, oh boy, Claudia, I nervously tiptoe up to this because there has been no more toxic conversation online over the last 4 years or so than Tua Tagovailoa being discussed as the quarterback of the Miami Dolphins, and it appears his contract is going to be discussed again soon now.
I was finding comments on Twitter and somebody said, please give the all-time mid quarterback his money. That's what people want to say. I've been high on Tua. I think people give him too much crap, but whatever, we'll get into it. You mentioned it, some of the players that people have their eyes on if they're going to show up to OTAs, because Tua did not show up to the off-season workouts before OTAs, but according to Diana Rossini, he is in the building for the start of OTAs. He's slated to become the next quarterback to receive a big payday. Like you said, they're with the contract negotiations, but he is there. He said he planned on attending the workouts. He's currently set to play under his contract, 2024, fifth-year option, rookie deal, $23.2 million. So my question to you, GoJo, how much do you think he should be paid, and when do you expect that deal to happen?
I expect, by all accounts, it sounds like they don't expect this deal to linger much longer. They said at worst it's going to be by training camp when this gets signed. It seems like, especially after last year, Dad, where sort of the same way we talked about Jared Goff or Dak Prescott or some of these other deals lingering out there, even the Brock Purdy deal coming down the stretch, where there might still be some questions about the ceiling ultimately for Tua Tagovailoa. Right. Is he ever going to be a top 5 quarterback in this league? But when it comes to these payday conversations, that's not really helpful or constructive because that's not the metric. It's more like, are you in that 10 to 12 range on your best day? And Tua was a quarterback, statistically top 5 last year. We know how much Mike McDaniel's offense has helped him out, but he did a bunch of things that looked like progress and looked like that next step next year. And for an organization that I'm sure, like most others, if they're smart, wants to try and solidify that position first, they're probably going to get this deal done, and probably sooner rather than later. So I won't be shocked. How much becomes interesting, Dad, because you look at Jared Goff, the way he reset the market, it was in average dollars per year. But when you look at the total guaranteed money or the fully guaranteed money on that deal, Jared Goff was only the 5th highest total guarantee amongst quarterbacks in the NFL. And I think that could be one of the areas where you kind of start to play with the details a little bit and say, hey, we'll find a way to make you the top market setting quarterback here, but we're not going to set any records. Joe Burrow has the most fully guaranteed money in $146 million in the non-Deshaun Watson division, obviously, at $146 million fully guaranteed. So I don't think we're going to broach that with Tua Tagovailoa, but you could find one of those other areas that makes him the highest paid and let everybody win.
So to me, they have to pay Tua, right? I mean, I know he finished one season last year, played 17 games. Rookie year on it was 10, 13, 13. We've seen him. He doesn't turn the ball over a lot. And it's one of those where you're kind of caught in the middle of do you or don't you? And then it comes down to the question again. This is a team building for now. They have the ability now. What are you going to do? Where are you going to go? It's kind of like with Detroit, right? With Goff, we weren't sure if he was going to be going into his last year, but they're building something nice there. So they're like, okay, let's ride with Goff, and I think you have to do that with Tua. So to me, and the reason you get it done is whether then your numbers are set and what you can do with the rest of the team and what you have to do, because the quarterback's always going to be the biggest contract you have to set. And we look at average annual salary, top 5, Burrow, Goff, Herbert, Lamar, and Jalen, 55 down to 51. I don't really care about average annual salary. To me, for the player, what's guaranteed, and for the team, what's your cap hit each year. Those, I think, are the more important numbers than the average annual salary, the way it has to break down for player and for team. So I would be stunned if this deal doesn't get done because of just 2 things, Mike. Where do you go if you don't do it? What are you getting that's better right now for a team that's ready, at least looking ready to win, since everybody's chasing Kansas City? So I mean that to me is the biggest thing is where else would you go? And the other is get it done now so you know how your money can be dispersed going forward.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the other side, the investment, and it's kind of like with Jared Goff, where you've gotten someone so used to this system. Mike McDaniel spent time revitalizing Tua Tagovailoa. Right. And to your point, there's a lack of options we know right now coming out in the draft, next year's free agent class, all these different things. So I think you're right. I think they're mostly kind of in quarterback no man's land here. And I think ability-wise, again, Tua, when healthy, is a good, is like a very good to very good player, right?
Yep.
Probably never going to be a great player in terms of that overall ability. When we talk with Nate Tice about how he loves wild horses, he loves guys that have that insane ability to go out there and create and do the things that you could never teach and coach. Tua is one of those quarterbacks that in the modern NFL that we see so many of these Shanahan McVay guys kind of fits more into, hey, no, he's going to go out there and execute your offense at a really high level. He's going to go out there and get the ball on time. You look at Tua, help mitigate sacks in that scheme for the guys, especially for an offensive line that was constantly rotating in front of him. And so I do think that's, in this NFL, there's value in that. And so I think you're going to have to find out. I'll be curious to add the length of this deal. That's really the thing that sticks out for me.
Yeah.
Because like you said, injury has been a part of the story here. Tua is not a very big guy. Obviously, he worked on getting a little more stout in the last couple of years, but overall, side-wise, not a big dude, and he's got some of the injury history built in there. And you're still trying to work out the offensive line situation. Like, I know they've poured resources into that and tried to address it, but injury has usually robbed that unit of its teeth by the end of the year, and Tua is always the one that's going to pay the price because he's the most at risk.
And that's where you got to, right? Because I feel good about them everywhere else. I like Mostert and Wilson at running back. Obviously, Waddle, Tyreek Hill. They pick up Odell Beckham. They have Braxton Berrios in the slot as well. I like what they have on the offensive side of the ball. So, yeah, it's got to be that old line to figure that out to protect him, because I'm with you. I don't think he's ever going to be the top of the barrel quarterback, but I think he can get you where you want to go. And the time invested right now, as I said, your window is open now. So to me, now is not the time to be screwing around with this.
Would you be more comfortable, Dad, because we know the next group of quarterbacks that are kind of in this bucket of up for paydays is Tua Tagovailoa, Trevor Lawrence, Dak Prescott. Would he be the quarterback in that group you're most comfortable paying if you're a team that's trying to solidify that position?
As far as what other teams now, what would it be?
Dak Prescott, Trevor Lawrence for the Jaguars, of that bunch there. Really, I would say between Dak and Tua, which one of those guys would you be more comfortable extending?
I mean, both guys were in the hunt for an MVP, right? One guy had a big turnover problem the other year. I'd probably lean toward Tua right now, because in all honesty, he's got more weapons to throw to. He's got outside of the old line.
I'm saying in a vacuum, if you had to pick one of those guys, if you're saying I have to extend this quarterback, and I'll say weapon agnostic, I'll say you give them the same weapons and you have that quarterback, which one are you more comfortable with?
Wow, that's a tough one. I mean, Dak's got the stronger arm on that one too. Is pretty damn accurate. Wow. I'd probably lean Tua on that. Where would you go?
My gut says Dak. Like, I've just seen him operate in more situations last year, especially in the offense that he was in. We know Mike McCarthy doesn't like to do you a lot of favors pre-snap. There's not going to be a lot. It's kind of on the players to get open and the quarterbacks to put it in right spots. And for half the season, there were very few quarterbacks doing it as well as Dak. Obviously, it tailed off later in the year, and we can get into reasons why and the imbalance of that offense. Dak's not a perfect quarterback. Again, he's one of those guys. I think, Claudia, we've had to kind of level set in the last few years and say, hey, the conversation we had when it was Dak Wentz debate for a while, and he was first coming onto the scene and took Tony Romo's job and looked like he might be that next wave of great. He's not that top 5 group either. Like, that's never going to be him, ability-wise or overall production-wise. But I do look at what he did on his best pitch last year and go, all right, I don't know if I've seen Tua do it exactly that way. Tua's made huge strides. I don't want to do that, but if we're going to split hairs here, age might be the one thing you could maybe account for in this, but knee-jerk reaction, I would say Dak. Claudia, what about you?
I was going to say age comes into it too, and I know you're saying weapons not part of this conversation, but Tua definitely does I think have that sort of double threat with both Waddle and Tyreek Hill, so that does come into play. If we're talking playing at home, though, the way that Dak played at Dallas last year, I'd pick him any day. I do want to bring the odds into this quickly as far as win total goes, if we're focusing just on Tua in Miami right now. I was not super surprised to see this, but 9.5, does that feel too low, too high for you? Minus 135 to the over, so is favored to go over that 10 or more. Of course, finished with 11 last year. GoJo, I'll go to you first. Does that feel like the right number? Too low, too high?
No, I think that feels like the right number right now, especially for a division that's kind of in flux. I mean, obviously, Buffalo is always going to be your chief competition there. They're the ones I would probably still pick at this moment. I understand Buffalo, the cupboard right now at wide receiver is as bare as it's been in a while around there, but I think you saw the way the offense morphed last year into more of a ground attack, and just the fact that Josh Allen, if he can harness any of that energy from the back half of the season, and he's fully capable of that, that's a Super Saiyan playing quarterback that's always dangerous to me. But for the Dolphins, yeah, Dad, they're absolutely capable of doing that, especially with the rest of this division. The Jets are sort of the wild card right now. There's a lot to hope and wonder about with Aaron Rodgers coming back healthy, but I still don't know. I want to see that newly formed offensive line go out there and protect him meaningfully. Some parts changed around on defense a little bit, but for the most part, that should be a unit with sharp teeth again. But that being said, I think still you give the tie to the runner in Miami here because they've been able to do this consistently for the last couple of years.
I agree. I would go with the over on that. The Bills, we're not sure what they're going to be. The Jets are a wild card. We got to see Aaron Rodgers make it past 4 plays, which I'm sure we will. And New England's just not there yet. So I'm good with over that. Mike, you already have me probably wanting to change my mind maybe about Dak over Tua. It's close either way because the one thing about Dak, he has been more durable in his 8 years as far as time missed. Only missed significant time really in 2020, missed a few games in 22, but he has been there for the most part. Another high completion percentage guy, low interception. So except for that 15 a couple years ago. But yeah, Claudia, I'd go back to the Jets. I would say the over on that one. That's a division maybe in flux now of who's going to take that thing over if it's not Buffalo.
Yeah, it's an opportunity this year for somebody to grab the hammer and decide that they're going to be dead in that division. Again, at the end of the day, I still tend to side with the nuclear option at quarterback and say Josh Allen is something that can help you figure out all the rest of that and can be what we expect a lot of these. When we talk about these quarterbacks, the unrealistic standard we hold for all of them is, can you actually go out there and improve life for all your teammates? And for most people, that's actually an unrealistic expectation. You're more dependent on the weapons than ever. But a player like Josh Allen, we've seen time and time again, is one of the very select few guys with the ability to go out, run or pass, and affect life for all the rest of his teammates in a way that makes it good. Coming up next, we'll go through a little OTAs of our own on this show and do some prognosticating for Tua and some of the other quarterbacks around the NFL next.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. As we discussed off the top of the show, OTAs kicked off this week. So we decided to do some organized team activities of our own. We're going to go through O, T, and A's, very creative. O being one more step, which playoff team from last season has the best chance to knock off Kansas City. T, transition, which team in a quarterback transition do you feel the best about? And A, and we're back. Which non-playoff team are you most confident in finding their way back to the postseason? So we're going to start with O. Again, that's one more step. Which playoff team from last season has the best chance of knocking off Patrick Mahomes? Senior, what team comes to mind?
Well, I mean, I'm going to take it one from each conference. And if I'm going to the NFC, you have to say the 49ers, right? I mean, the 49ers took them to overtime in the Super Bowl. I think, and it's not like they've come down. It's not like all of a sudden they lost a lot of parts. So this is a team with obviously one goal in mind, and that's that final step of winning. So to me, that's an easy one, unless, Mike, you have a different one in the NFC. To the AFC, looking at the AFC teams, more importantly, can someone knock them off before they even get to the Super Bowl? I'd probably still lean toward Baltimore, Mike, with that defense that they have. Lamar Jackson, and now you got Derrick Henry in the backfield as well. I know they already had the top running game, so it's not like they needed to improve on the top running game, but Derrick Henry's a hell of a hammer to have in your backfield to go along with a quarterback that can run. So I just think, again, of the AFC teams, that's still the best possibility. But as we know at Kansas City now, it doesn't matter if it's home or on the road because they've done it in both places. So I'd go San Francisco overall, and AFC, I would go Baltimore.
Yeah, it's a deeply unfun answer, but it's the same way it's been for a while. We're sort of in that stretch that the NBA was in where it was the Warriors and the Cavs, where until further notice, it's kind of San Francisco and the Kansas City Chiefs. And especially in the NFC, we've talked about it. San Francisco's in that final year of the Brock Purdy rookie deal where they can hold all this together. And it's felt tenuous, right? It's felt like walking across one of those rope bridges in a movie because you had all the rumors about Brandin Ayuk and Deebo Samuel leading up to the draft, and would this wide receiver room remain intact, and yada, yada, yada. So the end of the day, they're still the answer for that one. I agree. And Dad, you're right. It probably is Baltimore. I mean, you look, DraftKings Sportsbook has the odds to win the AFC up right now. Kansas City at plus 300, Baltimore at plus 475, and then the Bengals and Bills tied at plus 700 at third, respectively. And then you get into the Texans and the Jets and all these other things. But at the end of the day, I'm more willing to trust Lamar Jackson and what Todd Monken and he built over the course of last year. That Lamar Jackson was already quarterback with an MVP under his belt, but what you saw last season was exactly what we wanted. It was the prescription we needed filled for development for the downfield passing game that allowed Lamar Jackson to unleash the gifts that most of us knew were already there. And so they're breaking in some new pieces on the offensive line. That'll be helped by, like you said, Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry being part of a backfield that's got plenty. Keaton Mitchell back healthy, so you get the full thunder and lightning treatment. Defensively, the only concern I have, Dad, is that brain drain. You saw so many of their defensive coaches, including defensive coordinator Mike McDonald, hired off for other jobs. He's in Seattle now. Can they adjust to that? Helps that you kept most of your core defensive pieces there with Justin Madubuike, Roquan Smith, and Kyle Hamilton in the back end to kind of usher you through that. Yep. So that's absolutely, I'd agree, where I would fall in that one. If I was going to pick one outside of that, Dad, would you be more comfortable betting Buffalo or Cincinnati? Just because the injury risk for Joe Burrow is now something we have to sort of consider every year, since he's going to be a very hot pick because they're getting him back. Where do you fall on those two?
I would fall along the lines of Cincinnati. Because seeing what they've done with Burrow, we've seen them get to a Super Bowl. I would go with Cincinnati. I would trust them more, even though we had the injury issue. Get it? I think they, by wide receivers that they have, I think they have more talent going there, so I'd go them.
Dad using dial-up this morning. Claudia, let's get on to the tees and transition to the next part of OTAs here, and get right back to the quarterback conversation that we were having before.
Yeah. Quarterback transition is certainly something New England has been trying to deal with since Tom Brady left. And of course, they went and took a stab at number 3 to try and replace him with Drake May. Gerard Mayo, head coach, says this about the upcoming season.
I thought Drake did a great job, not only, progressing on the field, but also off the field. You can already tell, like, he's going to put in that extra work. I walk by the quarterback meeting room. He's just in there by himself watching film. And those are the things that you want to see, and excited to see his growth going forward.
And of course, he's actually taking sort of like the third team reps. They're saying that Bailey Zappe's taking the second most behind Brissett, but I don't think that's too surprising because, like Mayo has been saying, he just needs practice and there's some things he has to fix. So is this a team that comes to mind that you feel best about the quarterback transition, or maybe somewhere else, GoJo?
So, probably not at this point. I'm excited. I like Drake May more than apparently most people, considering he was the third quarterback off the board. And there ended up being some conversation around him towards the end of the draft. But, Dad, at this point, I would probably have to say Caleb Williams in Chicago, just because of the situation he's walking into, combined with the gifts of the player. I think he's one of those guys that has special traits, and now he's walking into a stocked cupboard in Chicago. Kirk Cousins would be the other one that's close as an answer, but he's 36 coming off an Achilles injury. And so I think that getting factored into it just has me looking and saying, I'd rather buy low on Chicago right now as they're walking into what could be the start of a decade of quality quarterback play finally in that city than Kirk Cousins, who we know is already looking over his shoulder at Michael Penix Jr., wondering what the hell he's doing here.
Yeah, I again, go rookie and then veteran. So I'll do rookie first. I agree, Caleb Williams. I mean, especially what they built around him, bringing in Keenan Allen and Roma Dunze with him, and to go along with their core right now. They get DJ Swift as well. DeAndre Swift as well from Philly. Now, they already were the number 2 rushing team in the NFL last year, but that was because of Justin Fields led the team in rushing, so he's gone. So they needed that running back in Swift. So I like that. Love the receiving room as well. And it was one of the top defenses. So I think that all helps a young quarterback. As far as veterans, you look at Kirk Cousins in Atlanta or Russell Wilson in Pittsburgh. Atlanta had 7 wins last year. Pittsburgh had 10. But I think because of the division, Mike, I would go with Kirk Cousins here. I would give them the chance, Atlanta, of making the transition and winning, of the transition of winning the division more than Pittsburgh would have a chance to win the division.
Yeah, well, and I think at this point in his career, I understand Pittsburgh, I should say this, like coming in, Russell Wilson, already a quarterback that you probably trust more than Kenny Pickett, right? And that's no disrespect to Kenny Pickett. He kind of went through what a lot of young players go through at times that derails their career, which is all these changes at coordinator, injury issues that pop up there. There were a lot of people that made that more of a Matt Canada problem overall in Pittsburgh. And now you're getting to an offense that feels like it's on a new day there. A quarterback who finally steadied the ship some last year as Sean Payton sort of retooled his offense to fit into that under center play action stuff that Russ thrives best in, that he's going to be doing now. So overall, Dad, that's a more stable, I think, position in Pittsburgh than it was last year. It's a more stable situation on a team that made the playoffs. I don't want to undersell that for Pittsburgh, but high end, I just don't think if you get both of them on their best day in 2024, Kirk Cousins is a better quarterback than Russell Wilson. And so if you're banking on that for both, that's the reason Atlanta's favored to win that division now in most people's estimation.
Agreed. I absolutely agree with that.
Of the other rookie quarterbacks, Dad, I look at the rest of these guys like Bo Nix. I don't know if I could touch that one. We all talked about it. We understood why Denver felt the need to reach at that point. The cupboard was so bare there. Sean Payton's in put up or shut up mode right now. But most of us looked at the 6th quarterback coming off the board and weren't even sure he was going to be a first rounder there. Right. Drake May in New England, like Claudia said, a guy that they're hopeful might not even have to see the field right away. They can really afford to slow cook that one, which is nice. Jaden Daniels in Washington is the other fascinating one, Dad.
Yes.
There's some good weapons on that team. The defense, we know, gave up a lot on the edges last year, but has tried down the spine to retain some things. And again, he's going to be a guy that can come right away and pull the ripcord of the run pretty early in his career and be successful.
I agree. And you always have to look in the division, right? The Giants, I'm still not sold on. Philly, as we've talked about, 3rd O coordinator and D coordinator in 3 years. And Dallas, I don't think is better than last year. So Washington, I believe, even only after 4 wins, I think they have a chance to make a little bit of noise this coming season.
Well, speaking of making noise, coming up next, we'll finish up our reps in OTAs with the non-playoff team that's itching for a comeback, one that may surprise you, next here on GoJo and Golic. All right, welcome back to GoJo and Golic. We're in the middle of finishing up OTAs, our organized team activities here, aka another excuse for an acrostic, which if you've been listening to the show for a while, you know we physically cannot resist an acrostic. So we had O's already. Team looking to take one more step to knock off Kansas City. T, teams in transition with their new quarterbacks. And now A, and we're back. We know, Dad, every year there's the stat about non-playoff teams that make their way back into the playoffs. We get that churn. Usually it's around 4 teams. The last few years, it's been about 6 or 7 teams. Part of that, of course, an expanded playoff, the parity in the NFL, yada, yada, yada. But now we've got it. So, Dad, looking at the teams here that qualified, there's a bunch. I mean, the list of teams that didn't make the playoffs last year are as follows. The Cardinals, the Falcons, the Panthers, the Bears, the Bengals, Broncos, Colts, and Jags, the Raiders, Chargers, Vikings, and Patriots, and the Saints, Giants, Jets, Seahawks, Titans, and Commanders. So a lot to choose from there, Dad, looking at this list. Yep. And looking at the odds right now, if we're looking at the people that are minus money to make the playoff this season from this group, Atlanta, the leader of the pack at minus 300 to make the playoffs, followed by the Bengals at minus 225, and then the Jets, Bears, and Chargers, all at minus money to make the postseason this year. So I'll start with that group, Dad. Of the ones that everyone's already looking at and thinking, hey, you're primed for the playoff, is there any in that group you actually like?
Maybe I should get in this gambling thing a little more because I did not know those odds, and my choice was Atlanta. That's where I was going. I mean, blind squirrel, right? I mean, listen, the Jets all on Aaron Rodgers and health, we know. The Bengals, same thing with Joe Burrow. So I look, and then you have to look at division as well that they're in. And you look at Atlanta, they had 7 wins and Tampa Bay won it with 9 wins. So it can be right there. They had a defense last year that was I think they were 11th, just outside the top 10 or right in that area. You hire a defensive coach in Raheem Morris. You have offensive weapons. You pick up Kirk Cousins, and you're in a division that's winnable. So that's all those factors together for me. I would take Atlanta out of that group to possibly win that division and or make the playoffs.
Over Cincinnati.
Yes, again, I'll say that because of the division. You know, Cincinnati's got Baltimore. They have Cleveland if they could actually only have a couple of quarterbacks. And we'll see what Pittsburgh does. I think they've gone in a better direction now. But I would say because of division and because of Raheem Morris being a defensive coach, and they already had a decent defense to help there. And then with the weapons on offense, bringing in Kirk Cousins, who we know can do great during the regular season and sometimes struggle in the playoffs. But this is only about making the playoffs, Claudia. So I'm going to give Atlanta the edge there.
Well, Senior, I will say, if you're going to get into betting, just know that was good. You agree with the market, but that means you're laying $300 to win $100. So that's not a good bet. If we're looking for value, a team that you mentioned, the Steelers, they're at plus 170. So put down 100 to win 170, 270 back. At plus money, we always talk about trying to get ahead of the market, finding a team like that before they got off to a hot start, that number comes down. That would be a good play.
I should have expressed myself better to say that maybe I should be a guy that makes the odds.
A bookmaker, yeah.
DraftKings. One of those people. Yeah. How do I do that? Do I got to fill out something? Who do I send that to?
Well, the crown is yours, Senior. You can do whatever you want.
Exactly. We got an inside guy. We'll talk to Papa DraftKings here and see if he can set you up with a cushy gig in retirement there. But Claudia's right. Look, we're looking at the teams. And listen, there's been public money all over Atlanta. As soon as they made the Cousins trade, you, me, and everybody else was up barfing in front of a microphone talking about how now they should be the favorite in that division, even though Tampa Bay brought back basically everybody in that core of a team that surprised a lot of us and outperformed what we thought that roster was capable of. So I think that'll probably end up being tighter than expected because we're still betting on potential with Atlanta. We're saying, hey, Bijan Robinson is going to be used differently by Zach Robinson and this crew than he was last year. You're going to maybe finally get a great Kyle Pitts season from the tight end that everybody's been looking for, especially from a fantasy perspective. So we're still betting a lot on that. I would agree with you, though, Dad, just because of the division. Cincinnati's in a war zone in the AFC North. I think the Chicago Bears in the NFC North, while there's a lot of excitement about them, I still might have them just on the outside looking in a playoff contention while that roster continues its ascent. And the Chargers are in the hellscape division that's still got Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs that were a single bid league last year as you look at the rest of the AFC West that missed the postseason. So we'll go to Claudia's point, though. We'll go to the teams in plus money for this next part because, again, we've had a fair amount, like 6 or 7 teams in the last couple of years. So chances are it wouldn't just be those ones up top. So, Dad, of the rest of that group, and it's Jacksonville, Indianapolis, New Orleans, Seattle, Minnesota, Washington, Arizona, Las Vegas, Tennessee, New York, Denver, Carolina, New England, I'm almost just sawing off because I do not think any of those teams have rosters capable of playoff contention at this point. Their goals are different this season, but from the rest of that group, Dad, here, the Jaguars are the highest at plus 100 to make the postseason out of that group, and the New York Giants are the last of the group I would consider at plus 425 to make the playoffs. Is there anybody in there that you would like?
Again, because of division, what do the Saints do this year in there with Atlanta and with Tampa Bay? That's a division. Last year, the Saints had the same record. They were 9-8 as Tampa Bay, and Atlanta was just below that at 7. So a lot of that I do look at division. I'm with you on the Giants, a no-go there. Jacksonville, you got to contend with Houston. And we're talking about, to the Souths, AFC and NFC, that are probably only going to get one team in, right? Last year that happened. They only got one team. You weren't looking at wild card. So that could be an iffy thing to say there. So you'd have to win the division. Man, that's I guess I would probably lean to Jacksonville if I had to lean to anybody.
So I think Jacksonville's an understandable choice, and Trevor Lawrence, one of the quarterbacks we talk about, is potentially extension worthy, and they want to see one more year of top-end production out of a guy that's never been able to so far consistently turn the traits into high-end quarterback play, or at least as high as we had that set in our mind. I go to the West, though, Dad, and a 3-bid league is always tough, but if anyone in the NFC is capable of it, I think it could be the NFC West, where Seattle's already going to be in the mix. I think the Rams, I've been bullish on the Rams for a while now, going back to the middle of last season. I'm smitten with this team. I get the defense is something we're going to have to adjust for with Aaron Donald, but my God, that offense is going to be so damn fun. But the other one I look at is Seattle, man. I mean, that's a team that already, with Geno Smith in the last couple of years, revitalized there. Mike Macdonald has been renowned for one of the great defensive teachers on a side of the ball that desperately needed help there. He brings over a system and has a couple of core players that are going to go a long way in that, including their top draft pick out of Texas. And then offensively, Ryan Grubb comes over with him from the Washington Huskies last year. That great offense that you watched in college football make their way all the way to the national title. He now is going to have Geno Smith to play with and Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf and JSN to play with in that group, and a quality running back room and an offensive line that, oh, by the way, should be healthy again this year. Remember, Dad, they had those 2 great rookie tackles that burst on the scene who then were part of the injury grinder all last year and really slowed down the gears on this offense because they just couldn't protect Geno Smith long enough to make anything happen with those receivers. So all that fun stuff you watched Ryan Grubb do with Rome Odunze and Jalen Polk and those guys that you dubbed last year is going to in part be implemented now in Seattle in a way that I think absolutely gives them a chance, combined with Mike Macdonald on defense, to be a playoff team again this year at plus 200 at DK Sportsbook.
Tough to go 3 in the division. There was only one last year. That was the AFC North with Baltimore, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. But I would agree with you. If there's going to be another division that's going to do it, it's going to be the West, and it would be Seattle. Because I'm with you on the Rams. I am high on the Rams and what they could do, especially if Cooper Kupp can stay healthy along with Puka Nacua. What a 1-2 punch there. But Seattle, up in the Northwest, they get forgotten about at times, and I agree they shouldn't. And this is another one, just like I mentioned Raheem Morris on how we can help there. I think Macdonald can do the same in Seattle on a side of the ball that's been struggling. So I do like the possibility of that. But I'll stick with Jacksonville. You go with Seattle. We'll see where it all falls.
Yep, try and meet in the middle on that one. We got a lot of time because right now we are talking mostly in this offseason program about haircuts. Joe Burrow, is this a Photoshop of him looking like Anakin Skywalker? We're amateur body reading experts. But coming up next, let's dive into one team in particular. Brandin Cooks, star wide receiver of the Dallas Cowboys, going to join us next to talk about their offseason, his quarterback, and more on GoJo and Golic.
really, it's a privilege, in my opinion, right? You play for a team like this, the most known franchise in the world. Take that as a privilege, and also take that as motivation to go out there so you can focus and prove everyone wrong that aren't on your side.
Only one Super Bowl winner every year, so every team is trying to tweak their team to get where they need to be. And, this was an offseason, as you know, the Cowboys always in the news about not really making a lot of moves in free agency and trades and such. What do you guys have thoughts on that? Or you've been doing this a while. You're a decade in the league. How do you treat what your team does in the offseason?
For the most part, I kind of don't pay attention. But when you do, it's like I take that as a compliment because, Will and Jerry and Steve, obviously they feel like they have a group that's in place that can get it done, right? And so when you have those opportunities where you don't see your team making as much moves, you take that as, I'm going to work that much harder to be able to prove them right on not having to make all those moves. So when we look up, they made the right decisions.
One of the moves people talk about a lot is Dak Prescott and his looming contract situation with the team. You got to spend a year with him in season. I know you guys have gotten to spend some time together this offseason. Based on what you've seen, should Dak Prescott be the quarterback of the Cowboys' future? What has stuck out to you about him?
Indubitably, absolutely, no question. I think last year what he did, the first year in Mike McCarthy's offense. I mean, for the longest he was MVP front runner, and then what I believe he finished second or third. And that was all done 1 year into Mike McCarthy offense. I think all he's going to do is continue to get better, continue to lead, and hit his stride. So if you don't do it now, in my opinion, it's just going to cost that much more later because he's on a mission for sure.
Boy, that's the truth about costing it later. That is for sure. As I mentioned, you've been in the league a decade now. Going back when you first got in the league, when you were first rounded back in 2014 in New Orleans, to now, how has your preparation at this part of the season, the off season, when you get ready to do OTAs, how has that changed for you?
I would say just, I just getting more and more dialed in because, the more you play this game, the more that you know your body, and your people that you're with. For instance, like my guy Ryan and Eric, we've been together for like 9 years now in the off season. So that accumulation of what my body's like, all I do, I just feel like I'm dialing that in more and more, spending more and more time on the football field, running routes, and more position specific rather than just only being in the weight room, whatever the case may be.
You've got veterans like you, CeeDee Lamb, obviously big star receiver in this room. But when it comes to the young guys on this team, how do you view your role in this wide receiver room? Are you the kind of guy that wants to take young guys under your wing, or how do you see yourself in this Dallas Cowboys receiver room?
Yeah, that's my mindset. Pass it on, right? When I was young, I had those older vets that looked out for me, but at the same time, knowing I could play the game at a high level. So that's not all what I'm doing, right? I'm bringing people along, but at the same time, my expectation for myself is to make plays and help this football team win games and make plays at a high level and consistently. And so that's the way I take it.
Looking at your career, you've been traded 4 times. I believe that ties Eric Dickerson for the most. And people think, he gets traded a lot. But you look at the stats, you've had 6 1,000-yard seasons. You've had at least 1,000-yard season with each of the teams you've been with, except Dallas. You're only going into your second year there. So you've certainly produced. So first, I got to ask, before anything else about the trades, how is your memorabilia room? You got to have some pretty good stuff, right?
I got a good one. You know what? Let's put it like this. When it's all said and done one day and my kids get older, they're gonna have some fun being able to look at all the different merchandise and whatnot that I got from other teams. So I'm definitely fortunate and blessed in that aspect. It's
gotta be a pretty cool room. And then how about the fact of being traded 4 times? How do you take that?
Honestly, I think it's one of those things that's a part of the game. I tell like my wife, I tell like my family, well, at least I haven't been cut 5 times, whatever the case may be. The trades coming with, you keep your contract, or in some cases you get a new deal. Man, it's all a part of the game. My biggest thing is I never want people to think I'm a locker room, a bad character. And I think if you ask any of my teammates in the past or currently, I think they'll nip that in the bud. And actually, each and every one of these coaches that I play for as well. And that's the most important thing for me is that my character is upheld. And every teammate can say, man, he's one of the best teammates that I've ever had. Everything else, it take care of itself.
100%. That's always what matters most, I think, to anyone who straps it up and goes in a locker room, is having that respect to your peers and your coaches there. And I mean, hell, in your case, not many of your peers can say they took their teammates up and flew them in a plane. I saw that footage. Was that before last season in the preseason when you had Micah and Stephon Gilmore up in that plane, man?
Yeah.
Were they white knuckling the whole time? Like, did you get them trust you
know
up there?
what? Steph, his stomach was hurting the whole flight. I mean, we landed. He was like, "Man, thank you." The whole time, because it was funny. It was all season. I was like, in order to stay current, you got to have 3 takeoffs and landings. Every 90 days. So I'm like, well, I think we got time. So let's go ahead and go in the pattern 3 times. So we just taking off and landing. And they're like, "Man, what are we doing?" I was like, "Well, you here now, so I need to keep current." So it was cool, man. It's cool.
So how often would you say you fly then? You mentioned you had to re-up there. Is it something you get to do very often in the off season now? Like, do you have someone that you go flying with often here?
Yeah, no, I go flying with often. Actually, this off season I got my instrument rating, and then I'm finishing up on my commercial. And I find time like early mornings. I take the kids to school. And when I'm done working out, I'll go fly for a couple hours. But my rule is I got to see them in the morning, and then I always got to be there to pick them up for school because I won't let that get in the way. Family time.
That's a great rule, my friend, because it goes by fast, no doubt about that. So listen, I hope you play a ton more years, but at the end of it, whenever it's over, are you looking to get to fly bigger planes?
No, it's just to stay a hobby. Any bigger, I got to sit in the back. I'm not sitting in the front.
All right, so we won't have to. You won't be walking onto a Delta flight anytime in the next 10 years and seeing Captain Cooks up in the front there getting ready for takeoff. All right,
you won't be sitting there.
All right, fair enough. Well, you know what, Brandin, we'll look forward to seeing you in the skies later on. But in the meantime, can't wait to watch you on the field this fall, man. Best of luck with everything, and good luck this season, man. We're rooting for you.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate it. Let's do this definitely again. You guys are awesome. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brandin.
into hour 2 of GoJo and Golic. The show just got better because we're joined by Charlotte Wilder to break down all NBA conference finals and much more, as we usually get a little bit off topic when it's us four together. A Wilder Wednesday on a Tuesday. You can catch her on Oddball with Emil Hassan. Well, actually, you have a new I saw that you have a new co-host though, right? I saw that on Twitter.
Oh yeah. First of all, the show couldn't get better. I'm merely blessed to be in its presence. But yeah, this is tough because Amin and I have had such a good run together. I think he's wonderful. He's so smart. But yeah, no, Larry O'Brien, the Larry O'Brien Trophy is actually my new co-host. Except the only problem is, guys, we found out he can't talk, so we had to hire Amin back.
Okay, There we go. You know what? A short-lived stint. Can I just say, I've seen Larry making the rounds a little bit of a hussy when it comes to his on-air partnerships there. That guy just moves through on-air partners like no one I've ever seen before, Charlotte. So I hope you didn't feel used in this situation, because it feels like Larry was trying to glom onto some of the oddball fame and then just leave you high and dry.
Listen, I was so honored that Larry would even consider taking a position like this with me. And also, to be honest, like, he went from us and then they were like, Larry really has to go. Like, he's got to be somewhere tomorrow. And I was like, oh, okay, Larry, big deal. And then he was with Chris Hemsworth and Anya Taylor-Joy for the Furiosa. Okay. So I was like, if I touch Larry and then like Chris Hemsworth is holding Larry, I think I'm okay with it, Gojo.
Hey, listen,
proximity to Chris Hemsworth like that, I would take that I think all of us would take that any day. So, Dad, I'm all, you know what? That softens the blow a little bit. I'm with you, Charlotte. That makes sense.
Plus, when you're a trophy like Larry and that big of a trophy, you are high and mighty, right? You get to choose where you go. You get to be your own thing. I was going to say person, but you're not a person. So I always remember when the Stanley Cup came through ESPN, and that was the most revered one because the guy brought it in with white gloves. Nobody could touch it. If you hadn't won it, man, you know what? When you're in that altitude, you get to do whatever you want. We're just in their orbit.
Can I just say too, the Larry O'Brien, fine trophy, but certainly not in the same vein as some of those other ones, right? Like the Stanley Cup, obviously better trophy than the Larry O'Brien. I would even say the Lombardi, better trophy than the Larry O'Brien. I think even going down, honestly, just below the Stanley Cup, I would put the old school coaches trophy, the crystal ball from college football back in the day. The Larry O'Brien is, I think, firmly a top 5 sports trophy, though, Charlotte.
I don't know. I've got to disagree with you there. I mean, maybe it's because I know him so well now, but he's so elegant. He's so elegant. Stanley Cup, like, yes, it's impressive and beautiful. And I was lucky enough to meet Stanley, a few weeks ago down in Miami with the Levitard family. But something about Larry, like, he's gold plated and he comes in a Tiffany blue, like pouch that's it's hard not to fall for him. Also, that thing is so heavy. I could not believe, like, you see pictures of like Shaq holding it with one hand, or of it blew my mind. I could barely get it up like over my, like, above my collarbone. That thing's got to weigh like 40 pounds.
But you got to hold Larry. That's why I think you're so close to Larry, Charlotte. You got to actually hold Larry.
Yeah, maybe that was dumb. Maybe now the Celtics are gonna lose to the Pacers, but I don't know.
All right,
so we can really, because you held Larry. Come on,
that is true. It's like at Notre Dame, they just had graduation at Notre Dame. The old wives' tale was if you walked up the steps of the main building while you were an undergrad, you wouldn't graduate. So that's why everyone goes and celebrates on the step. But that's as close as we got to superstition there. Dad, you shake your head at this.
Well. I had a guy that when I first started radio here in Arizona, and he was a big Mets fan, and he was one of those where he worked in media, and one time he went into the bathroom, and when he went into the bathroom, the Mets started doing well, so he stayed in the bathroom the entire time. Bruce Jacobs was his name. It was my first partner for a morning show on air, and he was firmly believed. This guy was in media, and the media still is. and firmly believe that there is superstition. So I know I don't have it. I don't think you do, Mike. For true fans like Claudia or Charlotte.
You don't think I do? I just pensively nodded alongside Charlotte and Claudia there too. Claudia, I am dead. See, this is where you and I are built different and this shines through all the time. My dad is so firmly athlete brain in the way that he approaches everything. Like I asked him a question about a team he was a fan of and he defaulted to a team he played for here. Cause I don't know if dad ever grew up as thirsty for fandom the way I was with Notre Dame as a kid, because I've absolutely done the bathroom thing where in the middle of when Notre Dame was playing Nebraska, and I think it was 99 or 2000 at home in South Bend, Notre Dame scored while I was in the bathroom, and I was in there for a quarter and a half. Claudia, you nodded your head. You feel where I'm coming from on this.
Yeah, but it's the opposite. I was at a game with my boyfriend, and he left, and I was one hit away from hitting a parlay, or I was like 2 hits away from hitting a parlay, and one of the legs hit, and I texted him. I said, do not come back, because I'm about to win this bet. And then once it hit, I was like, all right, you're good now.
So first off, I think you need to look a little deeper into the relationship if you text him, don't come back. But that's a whole nother thing.
He's supportive.
I wonder if he just got that text without seeing the other part of it related to the parlay and it's just don't come back.
I said, I need one more leg, do not come back.
Oh, man.
If
Charlotte,
if you didn't know what sports were and you got a text from your girlfriend that said, I need one more leg, don't come back, you'd be like seriously concerned. They'd be like,
maybe you trust me too much.
Yeah. No, listen.
Charlotte, do you
yes? I'm superstitious. I'm superstitious in weird ways. Like if I say something that I hope will happen, I have to knock on wood. And like I also say stuff like not to jinx it. I don't know if I'm that way about sports teams, but I recently watched Knicks Pacers with my husband and brother and sister-in-law, and my brother-in-law changed his shirt and then his hat, and then my sister-in-law was in the bathroom and they started doing better, and she was like, should I stay in here? So it's a very real thing. Wow. I think the thing about fandom is like what's so amazing about it and also very difficult about it is that you can't control anything. Like you are so invested in the outcome of this thing that you have absolutely no control over. So if it's like, and also because there is no way to go back and run a control experiment where like you wear the same outfit the whole time. If you could go back and play the game and replay the game and wear the same outfit and see if the outcome was different, that would be one thing. But all we know is that like sometimes you change your hat and then your team starts doing well. How do you know that's not you? You know what I mean? Like we have absolutely no way of proving it.
Oh, I know it's not you. I know for a fact it's not the person that changed their hat. Okay.
To each her own.
I want to dive into, Charlotte, the scene that you described, because we'll get time to look ahead to the conference finals coming up. You mentioned your Boston Celtics, and they're rolling all this. Is now, I think, the titular character. Like everyone is looking at the framework of the rest of this playoffs as Boston better get this done, because you look, there are plenty of teams throughout the history of the NBA that are littered with roads to an NBA championship that involve a little bit of luck, where you catch a few teams that are injured at the right time, it eases your path to a certain point, and then you get over the hump. For this Boston Celtics roster that's been the best in basketball all year, the Porzingis factor looming over, there's all that I want to get to, because I think this is a playoff we're going to view through your lens. But as we do a little post-mortem on the Knicks, take us through that experience of watching that final game with the Pacers, with that Knicks crowd. Was it dejected? Because I felt like towards the end, they're just so beat up, you could understand that this was probably eventually going to have the wheels fall off.
Totally, Mike. I mean, the whole time I was like, after they went up 3-2 against the Pacers, I think I might have even written a Substack, but it's impossible to remember or prove these things to myself, about the Knicks and how fun they have been this year. And, obviously I'm biased because I live with a Knicks fan, but like this team was so lovable. This team had grit. This team played really hard. This team had heart, and two of them, Josh Hart, Isaiah Hartenstein. Anyway, no one's made that joke before ever. No. So I think to me it felt like after that they were sort of playing with house money, because they're especially after OG Anunoby went out, it was like, who did they have they had nobody to come in off the bench really. And then it turns out they had Alec Burks, and they had, maybe they should have been playing him a little bit more so that the whole team didn't, we were talking about with Claudia, lose its legs, literally. But I do think that they're, watching with the Knicks fans in my life, it wasn't like, it was sort of like, oh, well, this sucks, but it wasn't like this is a failure or like they let us down. It was like, oh my God, we were so lucky to have this season, and, the future is bright. And I think, my husband was like, what were we going to do? Like this would have been sort of awful if they'd won and gone against the Celtics without, like, Jalen Brunson broke his hand in the third quarter. If you somehow miraculously won that game and then had to go play with basically your starting five, not even like available, but broken, it's not fun. It's not fun I think this was a merciful loss for the Knicks. And I think that the offseason of talking about what they're going to do is going to be very, very fun.
Yeah, I guess we always like to put a bow on teams that are out. And, we've certainly the other day talked about Oklahoma City and the youth there and what they're going to do. But for the Knicks, you got Julius Randle who played, I think, 45, 46 games only. You saw him sitting on the end of the bench there, and all the injuries. For you, Charlotte, as you look at this team, is there a big move for them to make? Or is it, we were a mash unit this year. It happens every year to some team in some sport. And is it just, you don't plan on that. You can't prognosticate that. Are they good where they are, or where do they need to tinker, if at all?
They definitely need another piece, to be honest. They need shooting. I think they need sort of what you would think of as a typical superstar. I've heard a lot of people talking about potentially Booker, Devin Booker, from the Suns coming over. Knicks fans obviously are like, LeBron, hello. Why don't you come win a championship here in New York? We'll draft Bronny. But I think, to me, it's sort of unfortunate for Julius Randle, because I feel like he might end up being a casualty in all of this, because they did so well without him for the back half of the season. They needed him. Like, I think ultimately they did need him. But I think that then becomes a very attractive piece of a trade. And, I didn't really have a great sense of Julius Randle or who he was. And I watched this GQ interview where he talks about his watch collection and like how much he's come to love New York. And I felt bad for him. It's a brutal business. But also, who knows? I could be completely wrong. I do think, though, that they need a little bit of help, because if you pair someone with Brunson now, like, that becomes, especially in shooting, like, that becomes the best backcourt in the NBA because of what he became this season.
Yeah, I think Dad and Charlotte and Claudia, as we put a bow on these teams, they're interesting to consider in this, because you look at the Western Conference teams that just finished up in this last round, right? The Denver Nuggets are going to be around still. Nikola Jokic is firmly in that window where he's either the best basketball player on the planet or in mild conversation with somebody else. OKC feels like they might have even gotten here a year early, a team like that being the 1 seed this year, and all they've gleaned from this playoff run with a young core that's only going to get better and tougher in the interior. But then you look at the East, and you're right, it's, hey, can this Knicks team sustain the pace? It's the classic Tom Thibodeau question that I get. People have gone back and forth on for a while, and people say, hey, we're maybe overblowing this. Like, this man's got a rich enough history to where we're allowed to wonder, especially when your season ends with every tire on your car snapped off, forget just popped. It's popped off the thing and is screaming across the side of the highway. So we're allowed to wonder with that. And Donovan Mitchell, I think, in the center of the Cleveland situation, Dad, a year left on his deal before a player option. Everyone's going to wonder if a team like the Lakers is going to sign him, or if a team like the Knicks is going to sign him this offseason. So, Charlotte, I think because Tibbs isn't going to change his stripes, you do need to go out and get another star like that. And I think the only feather in your cap that I could say there is for Julius Randle is, now that he doesn't have to be the guy, like, you found someone who is more capable in that role than Jalen Brunson. I do think Julius Randle could exist in a better functioning role on that team than ever. But if you've got to give him up to get another one of those star pieces by Jalen, I think you do it, and I don't really think you look back on it all that much.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And it's interesting to me, the Tibbs stuff, because it's hard to look at the Knicks and then look at every other team and think, why did they fall apart so rapidly and why did other teams not? It's kind of hard to say, well, because they played 48. Josh Hart played 4 games of 48 minutes straight. That is wild. Of course, one of his abdominals just like gave out. Of course, OG Anunoby's hamstring just like decided it was done. I think that seeing how well Alec Burks played in that last game, it's hard not to feel a little bit like, maybe there could have been like slightly less wear and tear on these guys if he'd used a few other pieces occasionally. But also, we don't know that because like the Sixers, that series was just a knockdown, drag out fight. Who knows if they would have gotten over the hump if they hadn't, used all of their guys. And I feel like their guys all wanted to be out there. I mean, we also saw with the Nuggets when they went out, like I think Jokic played 47 minutes of that game or something. He was just gassed by the end. Like sometimes you need your stars to do it all. And sometimes that ends up not being sustainable from a physical standpoint. But
yeah, I do think there's a difference, Dad, in sometimes your stars have to do it all, because we get that, especially in the postseason. You're going to play a lot of minutes. It's the fact that it's an all-the-time thing for Tibbs, and it got them ready. Clearly, they were a better conditioned team than every basketball team they faced in this postseason. Mm-hmm. It was glaring the way that these guys attacked it and were able to recover, but the injuries that Charlotte mentioned were soft tissue injuries, and most often those are overuse injuries.
Oh, without a doubt. And again, when your rotation gets smaller and more is asked upon you, I agree with you, Charlotte. Those are the things that give out over time. A hammy, an ab. I never had to worry about an ab. I always had too much fat over them, so I never, as I've famously said, you can't pull fat. So I was always pretty square there. But yeah, I what do you do? I mean, that's chess, not checkers, right? So I wanted to ask you this, Charlotte. Of the team, we know the teams left, Boston, Indiana, Minnesota, Dallas, which we'll get into. Of the teams that have lost now in the playoffs, one of the teams in each conference will make the conference finals next year. Who will it be in the East and who will it be in the West?
Oh, man. That's a great question, Senior. In the West, it feels easier. It feels like the Thunder. That felt inevitable, that they will, especially with the number of picks they have, if they want to do anything. I don't think they need to do much, to be honest. I think Shea is just an absolute machine. I would say the Knicks, if they can, even if they can't stay healthy, because they sure didn't stay healthy and they came a game away from the Eastern Conference Finals. So if they can stay a little bit healthier and maybe get one other piece, that's a terrifying team. They were the 2 seed. Like, I really think that what Jalen Brunson did this year cannot be spoken highly of enough. And it's funny that it's New York because people are like, the fans are obnoxious. Like, it's New York. The Knicks are so entitled. And it's like, well, this was also like the most lovable team in the NBA. So you kind of have sorry, everybody. That's how I feel about it. But I would say the Thunder and the Knicks. Yeah.
The Knicks are interesting because you look at other teams that might be eligible for that in the Eastern Conference, like the Milwaukee Bucks, that have all the talent in the world if Giannis comes back healthy, but seem to be in a real bad vibe state right now. The 76ers, who you mentioned, were not able to weather the storm of injury in that same way. And it's easy to say, and I've heard a lot of people say it, hey, if the Knicks are healthy, they win this series in 5. Well, part of this is always styles, and their style put them at risk for this. It's like saying, hey, if the Pacers had slowed down, maybe the Knicks would have won. Well, the Pacers don't play slow. They run bodies at you and they run fast as hell. So you've got to account for that stuff.
I think the deeper competition is definitely in the West. Oklahoma City, Denver, Minnesota, and Mavericks, just to clip off the top 4. So I definitely think that's the tougher of the conferences to come out of.
Well, a couple of those you mentioned are heading on to the next round. So coming up next, let's take a look at the conference finals matchups and figure out just how nervous Charlotte Wilder and the rest of Boston are looking at the field here on GoJo and Golic. All right, welcome back to GoJo and Golic. A quad box sighting here in the morning with Charlotte Wilder joining the crew. And it's perfect timing. We got a couple Boston fans in the house as we get ready for the start of the conference finals, guys. We'll get to the West that I think is a really compelling matchup and one where Minnesota riding this high, coming off beating the defending champs is certainly, I think, going to garner a lot of public attention. But, man, it's really hard to not be impressed by what the Dallas Mavericks did, basically remaking themselves at the trade deadline, the version of Kyrie Irving they've gotten here. But we got to start with the prohibitive favorites. The Boston Celtics taking on the Indiana Pacers. Charlotte Wilder, your level of confidence as a Boston Celtics fan and a basketball analyst is what in this team heading into the conference finals, where they are massive favorites not only to win here, but to win the whole thing?
I feel like those might be two separate questions as a basketball analyst and as a fan. I'm actually, after this, I'm driving up to Boston to go to game one, which I'm very excited about. I think, I was talking to a few people in media in Boston, and they were like, Pacers Boston doesn't quite have the juice that Knicks Celtics would have had, but it's interesting, guys, because you look at this team and the way that the Pacers were shooting against the Knicks in that last game, 67% from the field. It's like, what? Sorry, hold on a second. Isn't that what Boston is supposed to do? And isn't that how Boston puts away its opponents? And then you look at the Pacers and they play defense and you're like, oh, I'm sorry. Aren't the Pacers aren't the Celtics supposed to play defense? And so you look at a few of those close games with the Cavs and it's sort of like, I'm very confident. I think, I think that the Celtics are going to win. I think that the Pacers might make it a little bit harder than I would have thought if you'd asked me like 2 weeks ago, to be perfectly honest. And I think that if Halliburton can show up, and also like if Porzingis comes back, I think that changes everything. I think that it becomes much easier. If he doesn't, I don't know. It's kind of an exciting matchup, even if it's not the sexiest one we've ever seen in the Eastern Conference Finals. I don't know, Claudia, what sense do you get from being in Boston right now?
Yeah, I was waiting for you to say the Porzingis part of it. I think it's easy to look at that series with the Knicks, and you mentioned it, the fact that it went to 7 games with how hobbled the Knicks squad are. Some Celtics fans are probably looking at that saying, okay, we're fine. And then there's the other half of fans who are saying, okay, but can they keep up with the pace? The fact that the Pacers attack the rim at one of the highest rates. They're one of the best teams at limiting those threes. That combination of things doesn't sit well in my stomach as a fan. And as an analyst, I'm looking at this line, open 9.5, up to 10. So everybody's betting the Celtics.
Yeah.
But we've seen in the postseason, in the regular season, them definitely not cover, them lose by double digits to much, much lesser teams. So I have to admit, I'm a little bit worried. I was worried about the Knicks because I had that dog that I don't think the Celtics have, but the Pacers are playing with house money, and that's one of the most dangerous things, I think, when it comes to a team like the Celtics who has such high expectations. If they don't reach that, everybody wants to blow the team up, but it's like, can you? And then you have to think about the fact that you're going to have to pay Tatum and Brown, you're giving all this money. Derek White's going to have to get paid now, too. So I think expectations are really high for the Celtics, and that worries me.
God, Claudia, you need therapy. Holy smokes.
Wow.
What part of that?
I mean, I feel like we're your therapist here. I mean, you were just unloading there, going to what the guys are going to get paid after this.
It's
true.
No, it is. I think the Pacers take one in Boston. Porzingis is probably out for the first 2 games of this series, it looks like. This is the series, at least in this conference, that they're going to need him the most, because you have the 2 disparities here, Boston being hoisting up the most threes and the Pacers scoring the most in the paint. Porzingis, defensively, just 44% against him when he's in the paint. That's second best of those contesting 300 shots. So I think they're going to miss him. Pacers move at a high pace. Now, Halliburton's got to play well against, Holiday and White, the backcourt defense. And the defense of Boston, I think, is incredible. But I do think they're on a roll right now. They have other players that contribute. It's not all on Halliburton, though he has to play well. And Mike, I just think the paint's going to be the difference. No Porzingis. Pacers live in the paint, outscoring the paint. Bench does well. So I do think they steal one in Boston.
To the point about the paint being made here and the effect that Kristaps Porzingis has had this season, according to Second Spectrum tracking data, he allowed just 44.3% shooting in the paint, which was second best among players with at least 300 shots contested this season. So he's a difference maker there. I think we think about him in terms of offensively and what he's done, adding more of the post-up game to his repertoire. But I do agree with you, Dad. That's the interesting matchup for them for the rest of the postseason, because everyone is built to be able to some extent exploit them in the middle. But I think to the stuff that Claudia talked about with the backcourt, that to me is the thing is Tyrese Halliburton is still the head of the snake on this team. Now, it might be a little bit more amorphous than most. I think the pace is the real star of this team. But Tyrese Halliburton, we saw him talking his cash stuff in New York in that final game. That guy needs to show up a lot more often, not the guy that had scored 15 points and 13 points in the games before that, got going against defenders that are going to challenge him nearly as much as the ones in this Boston series. So that's the thing I worry about, that consistency of, hey, when you need it. And we know for Boston in the fourth quarter and crunch time, that's an issue for them too, one we've talked about pretty often. And for both of these teams, you've gone through the first couple of rounds going against teams whose better players have been banged up and either out entirely or injured enough down the stretch like this last series where it affects them. Both of these teams are getting another team at close to full strength for basically the first time this postseason. And I'll still give the edge to this Boston roster and say, yeah, this is probably Boston in 6 more than it is the Boston gentleman sweep we've seen in the last couple of rounds, but they're the better team. And I think in an ideal world, Charlotte, you would still get to rest Kristaps Porzingis some in this series because the rest of the talent on this roster should be able to take care of business.
Yes, I completely agree. And you're going to need him no matter who you end up facing from the West. I do think something that's interesting to me about Tyrese Halliburton is when he wore the sweatshirt after they beat the Knicks at Madison Square Garden with Reggie doing the choking motion on it from, Pacers lore. And something about Tyrese, like, I think we talk a lot about the Celtics not having that dog, as Claudia said, but as we go through the postseason, I'm sort of like, they're kind of true to who they are. They're not pretending to be anyone they're not. They're sort of going about their business. Tatum and Brown are pretty much like, like we're going to do this. We're not going to be stand-up comedians in the presser, which sometimes I'm like, oh, can you make a joke or two? But like, whatever. But like,
and I mean, when you get to watch Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns on the other side, you've got to really have some FOMO.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of like, oh, that looks really fun. But Tyrese, I feel like sometimes does an impression of what he thinks Anthony Edwards would do in that situation. And I kind of want to be like, just like do what feels right. Like the sweatshirt after at the press conference. If you don't have like an amazing series, I don't know, like do whatever you want to do, obviously. But I hope that the Pacers feel like just be you guys, like you've been lovely and fun and goofy and Miles Turner loves Legos, like just sort of roll with that. Don't try to be anything that you're not, would be my advice going into these playoffs, because that seems like an easier way to go about it.
We see the Knicks fans and how wild they are. How did your husband take this? If he was like a normal type of a Knicks fan, how was he?
He was like, what a loser or something. Like but he doesn't really, I mean, he's also just such a big basketball fan, and he's just had to watch so much basketball with me that he's, I guess you could say I married him because he's the most rational Knicks fan I've ever met, which I think says a lot about a person. I also married him for a lot of
married him because of that.
No, he's like, if you find a Knicks fan who's like a rational, lovely person, you're like, there is something very special about that guy.
Fellas, if you're in the tri-state area, make sure that Hinge bio reads rational Knicks fan and just prepare to find the woman of your dreams here. The proof is in the pudding. Coming up next, we'll get to some puck and the most unenviable job in all of pro sports next on GoJo and Golic.
Halfway through the second hour here on GoJo and Golic, joined by Charlotte Wilder to break down NBA Conference Finals. We talked about how big of a favorite the Celtics are in the East and their chances of taking down the Pacers. So let's head to the West now with two teams I think we're all excited to see at this point. The Timberwolves and the Mavs. Timberwolves not as big of a favorite as the Celtics in the East, just minus 170 to win the series. Game 1 tomorrow, they are 4-point favorites, the Timberwolves at home ahead of the game, and came out to talk about his teammate, Karl Anthony Towns.
Karl Anthony Towns. Karl Anthony Towns. Karl Anthony Towns. It's because of him. Thank Cat, y'all. Thank Cat, y'all. They ain't have no answer for Karl. Karl the baddest big on the planet. Y'all know it. It ain't hard to see it. Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals. The Timberwolves will be there.
Karl Anthony Towns thinks that about himself as well. Charlotte, whether you agree or not with that, I feel like we can all agree that Anthony Edwards is so likable. He's just so likable to watch and to listen to.
I mean, this dude must have found a playbook on how to be the best rising star the NBA has seen in decades. This guy so far this season, has in the playoffs especially, it's like he's taken over in terms of always crediting his teammates. He's always saying Cat or Jaden McDaniels are the reason they won. Even the way they poked fun at Rudy Gobert, where both Ant and Cat were look, the minute he hit that turnaround jumper, and we were we're probably winning because Rudy Gobert very rarely does that. And if he does that to you, it's probably the most demoralizing thing that could happen. There's a spirit with which he plays that I don't think can be overstated. And that is why, I not to brag, I did say Wolves in 7 over the Nuggets because they have this ineffable thing that is so difficult to beat. And whether he's likable or not, I feel like I'm always wary of being oh, I really like this athlete if I don't know them. I like what he is publicly putting out right now. I like how he is playing the role, and I think that if you're a Wolves fan, this is the most exciting thing that could ever have happened to you. And I also think that in terms of the NBA, I would be psyched if the Timberwolves won over the Nuggets, because if you can sustain that success, if they can make it far, if they can God forbid, win a championship, who knows? We'll see. If that becomes a dynasty and you have Anthony Edwards as the face of it and then becomes the guy like Steph or LeBron where your kid turns on the TV and expects to see him playing in the finals, that's a pretty good situation for the league to be in. So it's fun. It's really fun. And yeah, as a Celtics fan, you're sort of oh, they look like that's a buddy comedy I would watch, guys.
It's listen, I love what Anthony Edwards is doing. I think it's great. 22 years old for the league. And it comes down to that question at times too, if Denver had gone to the finals and maybe won it again for 2 in a row, or when Golden State was running them, in any sport, do you want the dynasty or do you want a little more parity? And you certainly, with Minnesota's win over Denver and knowing what Oklahoma City can do and where Dallas is, you're getting that parity a little more. Mike, as far as the game, you sit here and look at, we always say in football a lot as well, if you're meeting in the playoffs, did you meet in the regular season? Does that matter? Minnesota was, 3-1 against Dallas in the regular season, but Dallas hadn't brought in Gafford or P.J. Washington. And I think P.J. Washington is kind of that X factor. He's the second leading scorer behind Luka. He's been the X factor to me for Dallas.
He has. He's been incredible. The way that team remade themselves both in the draft with Lively and then with Gafford and PJ, like you mentioned, has been remarkable around a player that finally trusts his running mate in Luka Doncic. Dad, I'm having a real hard time overall with what I feel about the series. There's just something deep in my gut that says Mavs in 7, despite all of the goodwill that we've seen around this Timberwolves team. And knowing that, hey, Luka Doncic on the other side, been banged up for a while now. Can he really outlast a Minnesota team that plays this sound defensively? So while my gut's saying that, what I've seen with that in mind, with what we see, Minnesota won that last game on defense. They came out in the second half against Denver in Game 7 and said, we're going to put the clamps on you the way they have all year. Mike Malone was like, that was the number one defense in basketball all year for a reason, and being built the way they are inside out. I have a real hard time picking against them in 7. And to Charlotte's point about getting a player like that into a championship, parity I go back and forth on is a good or bad thing, because I think that 5-year run with Steph Curry and LeBron James meeting in the finals every year was special, and with the right guys is great for the overall league product, to have someone you can point to and say, all of the rest of us are chasing that standard right now, and we have something to judge everyone else on as a clear level set there. If you get it with that kind of personality and that kind of talent, Charlotte, I feel like the sky's the limit for what you can start to do marketing that as a professional league.
Oh, yeah. We talk about this on Oddball today, actually, where Amin said, parody might be fun for the basketball nerds like us, where it's like, oh, cool. This guy did well, this guy, but for most people, if you're tuning into the Eastern Conference Finals, Western Conference Finals, the finals, like, it's really good for business to have people recognize the people who are there. And I think it's fun for storylines. I think that it's always great to have, a dynasty is fun because they're in the beginning. It's like, oh my God, can they do it again? And then eventually it's like, oh my God, can anybody stop these, insert swear word of choice here. And I think that's really fun. So I think that the league would be very lucky if they can get that in Anthony Edwards. So we'll see. I don't know. I'm just excited. I think I'm really glad the Timberwolves are moving on.
Yeah.
I am too. I think in terms of things I'm interested to watch this series, I think Anthony Edwards already came out and said that he's going to be checking Kyrie Irving as far as the backcourt defensive matchups in this series. Yes. And Kyrie, we've lauded the leadership. We've talked about the ability to distribute, but Kyrie in that last series was not a consistent offensive threat. Dad mentioned PJ Washington was the second leading scorer behind Luka on that team during the series. And so now you take Kyrie Irving, who's going to have a bigger, incredibly physically gifted defender that's all over him to start that. And I think there's an understanding that, hey, as long as we just let Luka be the one to get off, we might be able to weather the storm before the Dallas Mavericks. So seeing how they address that defensively, Dad, from a strategy standpoint. And then on the other side, for Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, that matchup with the bigs of Lively and Gafford in that front court for the Dallas Mavericks, who are a rough group. Like, I want to see if they can go in and bully those guys a little bit. That's never been Jokic's game on the other side. Those two dudes are out there to goon and rim run, and so I want to watch and see what that matchup's like for that, as I think Bomani Jones calls them, 14 feet of sucker in the middle of that Wolves offense.
Listen, I agree. And then the thing to watch is obviously when you get big men battling is 5 minutes into the game, does somebody have 2 fouls? That's always something
that's the
to keep
Karl
an eye on.
problem,
Yeah, that changes the complexion of the game, because we know NBA is ebbs and flows, and Minnesota's been so much of it. 7 of their 11 games they've trailed at halftime. 4 of them they've come back and win, including the monster one in Game 7 against Denver. They were down 20 in the third quarter. So this is going to be back and forth, but that's always something interesting to me, is how the game is officiated. And that's true in any sport you play. As an athlete out on the ice, the court, the pitch, the field, whatever, you have to play with how the game is being officiated, and all you want is consistency in that. And that's what I look for. Get through the beginning of that game, see how the refs are calling it without getting somebody with 2 fouls, Mike, and having to sit early.
All right, quick before we go to break, Dad, picks for both series, winner and games.
I mean, it's tough for me not to go Boston in 7, but just to be different, I'll go Pacers in 7. Boston's going to gack it away in Game 7. Sorry, because I know y'all will pick Boston, and I'm going to go with Minnesota. I think Minnesota wins this. I'll say in 6.
Charlotte?
Yikes. Boston in 6, and I'm going to say, my gut is saying I might do Wolves in 7 again. I want to do Wolves in 6. Wolves
just
in 6.
Pick one. There you go.
Wolves in 6. All right, I'll go Wolves in 7, and I will also go Boston in 6. Claudia?
Yeah, you can interchange the 6 or 7. I think it'll be Minnesota-Boston either way.
There we go. Excited to kick it off and get started tonight. We'll wrap it up here next on GoJo and Golic. All right, guys, time to finish off the show the way we always do. This, that, the third. 3 quick stories to send you off into the rest of the day. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us. Leave us a 5-star rating. Check us out here live Monday through Friday when you can from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern. If you missed that, you can catch the best of GoJo and Golic noon to 1 p.m. Eastern wherever you hear VSiN on the radio. And if you missed that or any of our great guests, thank you to Cowboys wide receiver Brandin Cooks, who joined us in the first hour to talk about their upcoming season. And, of course, our buddy Charlotte Wilder here for a Charlotte Wilder Wednesday on a Tuesday. You can catch her on Oddball with Amin El Hassan, not Larry O'Brien, every day but Monday here on the DraftKings Network. Guys, let's get to this, that, and the third. We talked a lot about the conference finals in the NBA today, but the conference finals in the NHL also set right now. In the Eastern Conference here, we're going to have the Panthers and the Rangers, game one of that series coming up tomorrow. And then in the West, the Oilers finally punched their ticket last night. They win an exciting Game 7 against the Canucks and now face the Dallas Stars in the Western Conference Finals there. So very excited for that one. Claudia, I know you're the biggest hockey fan here on the set. So any big surprises for you? Anyone that you've been trailing betting-wise that you're pumped about? What do we got here?
I'm having an internal dilemma, kind of like Charlotte just had with going Game 6 or Game 7, which I totally copped out of. This Oilers-Star series is tough. I have been so high on Dallas. I was really high on them last year. Of course, with Jake Ottinger and that, he's just an animal, but the depth they have on offense as well. So I love the Stars, but the Oilers, I think, have been the most fun team to watch. So I'm really stuck there. And just as a sour Bruins fan, I would like to see the Panthers not win, although they're the favorite to win it all. But I'll back the Rangers. They're a nice, gritty, fun team. Grit against grit, that game will be. So that'll be a fun one to watch.
It was a fun one to watch last night. Again, when it was 2-0 in the second, I thought next goal would win. I thought if Vancouver got one there, they could have pulled it out, but it was Edmonton that got that 3-0 lead, ended up winning at 3-2. It's a shame because the Canadian team's knocking themselves, one more out since the last Canadian team to win was Montreal in '93. But I'm looking forward to when we get to the end here, the President's Cup. The Rangers won that, correct? Yep. And I think since '85, I just looked up 8 times. When you win that, you win the Stanley Cup. It doesn't happen much. Last one was actually the 2012-13 Blackhawks, but it doesn't happen much. So it's something the Rangers are trying to get over on. We'll see if they're able to do it.
I am going to be honest, have not been following hockey that closely because my life is consumed by basketball. And I had one night off of basketball last night and I watched Top Chef. So,
and you know what, Charlotte, that is okay to admit.
Yes. You need the recovery.
When in doubt, Charlotte, just get pucks to the net. That's all you got to focus on here. Parachute on hockey, pucks at the net, goalie standing on his head. You're good to go, and you've checked your box there. So getting started with that one. Like I said, it was fun to get to sit and digest one last night where I didn't have an NBA game competing or I didn't have something else competing. You just got to sit there and watch two of the best words in sports, Game 7, and in this case, Game 7, playoff hockey. Speaking of a sport where we allow people to fight largely because of the complexion makeup, Claudia, let's get to a NASCAR fight that we saw from this past weekend.
Yeah, this was actually the first NASCAR fight that I went back and watched the whole entire video because it's very interesting. And the words went back and forth after is funny, which I'll mention. So it's Kyle Busch and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Basically, it looks like Busch had wrecked Stenhouse on the second lap. $1 million on the line, by the way, this race Sunday night. And apparently they're saying that the wreck was retaliation for how Stenhouse had raced him earlier. So his car gets wrecked. He waits for Busch to come over after the race. And they do talk. And then he throws a right hook at him. And they go down. And then the words exchange after. Stenhouse says, "I'm going to wreck you at Charlotte." And then Busch says, "Bring it. I suck just as bad as you do." Because right now they're not having good races so far. That was my favorite part of it all. I was reading into it. Yeah, man. I mean, I love any sanctioned fight. This wasn't sanctioned, but I guess he had it coming for him.
No. Hey, this is why they love the cameras right there when that's going on. Stenhouse, he just went and parked his car, or when he was done, he parked in Busch's pit, and just waited. Waited. And then the fight started. One of the pit crew guys, Mike, was just tossing people. It was like a little ramp area and was just tossing people. But the one thing I don't think you can do is it would be like, to pick a sport. You know what? Next game, I'm going after your knees. You know, in football, don't tell them you're going to wreck them in a race coming up. Everybody's probably going to be looking for it anyway. I guess it's not like you're talking out of school here, but man, don't broadcast that, that you're going to wreck them.
It's just it's the funniest and like also dumbest part about sports that for some reason we allow that in, but God forbid, if you have fights like this in basketball or football, we know how everyone reacts. But the fact that in baseball, you get guys that after an altercation will throw a 90-mile-an-hour fastball at someone's head the next game. The fact that in hockey, if you've got an altercation, the next time out there, they just blow the whistles and drop the gloves and let two guys go. And this man literally said, I am going to crash my car into your car at 200 miles an hour in the next race. And we're all like, oh, racing, here we go. Like, it's inconsistently just like that being said, it's fun as hell. And in this one, having the tires around there, it's got to be the worst feeling to get tabletopped by a bunch of rogue tires that are standing next to you for how dumb you end up looking in the middle of this fight.
Listen, there was a time in my life when I did a fair amount of NASCAR stuff, which, you know, wild stuff. NASCAR fights are some among the best. There was a racer named Tiny Lund back in decades ago. And it was either his wife or his mother, Elizabeth, who like got into a fight with someone who had, you know, done him wrong. And she had a pistol in her handbag and like hit him over the head with the pistol in the hand. I mean, there's legendary stuff here. Really highly recommend going and reading into the history of NASCAR fights. Because it's amazing. Also, earlier I said that there wasn't basketball on last night. There was WNBA basketball on. Watched a little bit of that. There wasn't playoff basketball. Gave myself a little bit of an out. Watched some Top Chef. Had to correct that.
Right. There we go. Careful. You're walking a fine line there, Wilder, and we want to make sure that you don't go over that right now. Speaking of things firmly behind the line here, wholesome dad content here, Claudia. Let's get to the third. This is very much our brand of show. Yeah. A young son explaining some complicated pop culture reference to their old man.
You could have told me this was Mike Golic Jr. texting Mike Golic Sr. and I would have believed you, but no, it was Chet Hanks texting Tom Hanks. Basically, Tom Hanks asked his son Chet, can you break down this Kendrick Lamar beef? And he did. I think if you don't understand the beef, take a read. I'm not going to read it because it's very long, but he detailed it out. And then in senior fashion, Tom Hanks basically replied, wait, so what happened? After his son goes, did you not just read what I just typed out to you? And he also said, holy cow, which everybody's liking because that's very Tom Hanks of him.
Is anyone talking about the fact that Tom Hanks said Big Maine? B-I-G.
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure if that was a typo or if Tom has just been so like well trained by Chet in the way that he talks to refer to him as Big Maine. So, Dad, I'm not sure where you fell on the Big Maine debate, but how did you internalize this from the Tom Hanks perspective in our chat?
Here's how I internalize it. I get mocked a lot for not knowing what the hell's going on. I didn't know what was going on in this beef. And part of it was, in all honesty, I don't care. I literally do not care. But for the good of the show, I was trying to figure it out. And as I read a couple of lines of it, I got bored and disgusted with it and said, I don't care again. So I would be just like Tom Hanks and asking, okay, after you told me who supposedly won this beef, I'll say this. I get mocked incessantly. I understand it for not being the internet guy and not knowing these things. But when I'm in a group that Tom Hanks is in, who I consider from my era, Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington as two of the greatest actors, certainly from my era, if not of all time, then I feel I'm in pretty good company if I'm in with Tom Hanks. So I'm fine with where I'm at.
No, it's good company to be in. I will say, though, you didn't care. I give Tom Hanks credit for willingly seeking out this information. He went to Chet and he was interested in this. He wanted to become better educated on the subject. And so he went to a man who I believe just 20 hours ago on his Instagram declared it once again a white boy summer on the way up. So just for everyone out there that looks to Chet Hanks as the groundhog of white boy summers, he has seen his shadow. He was able to go there for accurate information. If you feel like we've given you some accurate information, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review this show and Oddball with Charlotte Wilder and Amin El Hassan. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.